Good morning, everyone. Let me know if you can hear me okay.
Morning.
Morning, teacher.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let me know if you can hear me. I don't know if I can hear you, but can you hear me? If anyone can maybe send a message in the chat if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me, but I guess I can't hear you for some reason. Why can't I hear you? Okay, can we try one more time if you can hear me? Or let's see if I can hear you better yet. If someone can say something, please. Just want to see if I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Got it. Hope you guys are doing well this morning. We'll get started here in a second. Anybody has any general questions you want to ask this time? Feel free to do so. Got a lot of things to talk about today, and we'll get started here, but let me know if you guys have any questions or concerns before we get started. Yeah, I'm going to try to record today's discussion, and like always, if you guys need to refer to it, I'm going to make it available, of course, in our playlist in Microsoft Teams. So, for whatever reason, if you need to step away, and that's fine. We're going to try to get through a lot of information today. I know these online sessions, there's typically a lot of information, and I want to try to allow some time for me to answer some of the questions that come up. So if what I'm discussing, if you guys have questions, just go ahead and interrupt me. Just turn on your mic and jump right in. Okay, I would rather you do that. I probably won't have, I won't be able to look very closely at the chat as I'm going through some of my notes for today. So yeah, just jump right in if you have specific questions about anything that I talk about here today. We'll have some time afterwards also to answer questions. And for those of you who had scheduled your tutoring session for today, if you want to meet right after this session, we can do that, or we can schedule time either later today or later to meet. I want to make sure that we meet those of you who have your scheduled sessions for Friday for today. Want to make sure that we meet at some point. Okay, so this scheduled talk today, I'm not sure how long it's going to last. I want to get through a lot of stuff. But yeah, if it goes into the tutoring sessions that are scheduled for today, there's no problem. We can meet after the session or later today. All right, my friends, let's get this party started. Today, my God, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? Let me share my screen. Again, please jump in and ask your questions or comments at any point. Okay, so make sure that you interrupt me if we need to address something. So today, actually, we're concluding our data collection process, and if you look at our syllabus, we spent the first 6 weeks working on the literature review, and you have received feedback for your literature review after we completed the 6 weeks. Some of you have been requesting additional reviews, making changes, and you can continue doing that. If you want me to look at your literature review after you've made some of the changes. We started the Unit 2 to collect the data. We spent 6 weeks, and today actually is now to conclude the data collection process, which includes the method section. And in the method section, we're going to include basically 3 sections. We're going to have one section that relates to the participants. We're going to have one section that relates to the instruments, and a third section called procedure and data analysis. Now, I know some of you are still collecting data, and some of you will still be collecting data into next week. So I'm going to extend the due date for completing the 500-word method section to next Friday, 1 week from today, April 23rd. So if you need extra time to complete it, fine. If you can finish it this week, I would encourage you to go ahead and finish the method section. Try to use the information that you included in your data collection spreadsheet that we've been working on throughout the entire unit. So try to complete the method section by next week. I know that part of the data analysis, which is also included in the method section, you may not be able to complete, but that's okay if you are still making changes to your method section going into the beginning of May. Essentially, what we're going to talk about today, the data analysis, is basically what you should be working on for the rest of this month, the month of April. Now, one of the most common mistakes that students make at this point in the research process, once they've collected all the data, the tendency, the feeling is that they want to immediately start writing the results. And this is a big mistake. So don't fall into that pattern of thinking, I need to start writing in my thesis paper in the results and discussion section. Half of your paper, right? The rest of the second half of your paper is going to be the results and discussion section. Let me go into our template, and I'm going to pull up one of the main template that all of us started with at the beginning of the semester. And so we're going to, go into thesis writers. And we wait. Okay, here we go. So here's a template. Let's just open this to see an example. Okay, so the first section was the literature review, so we've completed that. And then we completed the method section. Okay, so then we completed the method section. We'll have our participants, we'll have our instruments, and the data procedure and data analysis. There's actually a mistake here. You want to capitalize data and capitalize analysis. Okay, so I would change that in your paper, but I would keep the exact same headings as it appears here, as well as method. Okay, so you would just add your text here in each of the respective sections. But the tendency is to want to rush to this final section. This is our last section, results and discussion section, where you're going to present your findings. Today, we're not going to talk about how to develop this section, because before we actually write out the results and discussion section, and this is the point I want to focus on today, is the importance of doing the analysis, the importance of understanding what you've collected. All of you at this point have collected a lot of information. Some of the information you're probably more familiar with than others. And that's fine. That's normal, because we still need to do the data analysis. So don't make the mistake of trying to rush through the data analysis, thinking that you're going to save time and do a better job with the results and discussion, because that probably won't be the case. In order to write a good results and discussion section, this section is going to be over 2,000 words. This is half of your thesis papers to present your results. But in order to do that well, you need to do the data analysis. You need to understand what's interesting, surprising, something that you didn't anticipate. This is what you're looking for when you do your analysis. You're discovering the information to really understand it, to see what it all means. Okay? When you present your results and discussion section, you're not only going to present the results, you're going to state what it means. You're going to make a value, you're going to make an assessment or judge the information, to interpret the information based on your theory, based on your data. So in order to do that, we need to do a very good data analysis. Okay, so this is the important step that I want all of us to focus on for the rest of this month, the month of April. So this is our schedule. And just to review, today we're finishing the data collection process. Okay, so we are here, week 12. We're going to start here. It says final data analysis and results and discussion section. So again, I stress the importance of trying to spend basically the rest of this month, the month of April, to do the complete data analysis. Please do not rush through it. You need to spend time doing it, of course. And the best way to do it, I think, is to try to spend some amount of time either every day or every other day with this data analysis process. Try not to let it sit for a week and then go back to it, or even 3 or 4 days, because it makes it that much harder to get back into the flow of things, to kind of remind yourself of what you have learned so far. It just makes it more difficult. That rule applies to writing or basically anything else. The more that you can visit this information, the better. All right, so when we come back after spring break, okay, we're going to come back May 3rd. Okay, so our tutoring sessions will resume as normal starting May 3rd. All right, so let me pull up my schedule. And so just to show you here, May 3rd, this is our schedule. These are those of you who will have your tutoring sessions when we come back starting May 3rd. Then, of course, the next week we'll continue with those of you who are in the following week. Okay? Now, all of these, because I've included these in my schedule, they all should also appear in your own schedule in Microsoft Teams. Okay? If there's any question about when your tutoring session is scheduled. Okay? So we have here May 3rd, we'll be coming back. And as of May 3rd, this is when I suggest that you start writing your results and discussion section. So having spent 2 weeks doing the data analysis, that should give you the time necessary, if you spend the time necessary, to get your head around the information, to understand it, to interpret it, and then we can start talking about writing the results and discussion section. Now, probably what I'm going to do, I'm going to be around during break. I probably will create a video that will describe how to go about developing the results and discussion section. We don't have any more mandatory whole group sessions scheduled for the semester, but I think having a video, creating one that you can look at and refer to as you're thinking about your results and discussion section will be important. So I will create something. I'll make it available at the beginning of May, probably May 1st or 2nd, so that you can start thinking about how to organize that. But that's not the topic for today. I want to provide kind of an overview of where we're at so far this semester and where we're going. So on May 3rd, we're going to dive deep into now the results and discussion. This is going to give us 2 weeks basically now to write out the results and discussion section. Again, if you do the analysis and you spend the time necessary to really understand the data, the results and discussion section will be much easier, and of course, it's going to be better. It's super obvious when I read results and discussion section, those of you who have not done the analysis. It's very obvious. It's obvious to the reader because all the results are very general, right? All of you are doing descriptive research. That is, your job is to describe the answers to the research questions that you've chosen. Your job is to get into the details. What did they say specifically? It's not just your interpretation. It's what did they say and what did they do? What did the students say? What did they do? What did the teachers say? What did they do? What are your points of comparison? Where are the similarities? Where are the differences? Doesn't matter if it's between groups. Doesn't matter if it's within groups, maybe between students within the same group. What did the administrators say? So it's really getting into the details. We're going to spend 2 weeks finishing the results and discussion section. Then we'll have 1 more week to finish the abstract and the conclusion. This last week, this is the week of the 17th through the 21st. We're right here, week 19. During this week, if you have completed after 2 weeks the results and discussion section, right, we can make any final changes to the results and discussion section. So by May 3rd, right, when we come back from break, you really should have your literature review completed in terms of the final changes pretty much so that you can really dedicate the time necessary now to finish the rest of the paper, to finish the results in the discussion section. So this month of April, try to get into the data analysis and make final changes to your literature review if necessary, if that's where you are in the process. Okay, that would be my suggestion. Because if you hold off and wait until May and you're trying to put together your results and discussion section, well, it's going to get a little heavy in terms of your workload. Okay, so try to plan ahead. I want you to enjoy the break, but I also want you to stay on top of your process, right? So that you don't get behind. Now, I will say this, if anybody is behind, okay, you feel like you're behind, you feel like you're lost, or you don't know how you're going to be able to finish, then reach out to me. You know, contact me. We can discuss it. We can discuss whatever your situation is, wherever you are in the process. And, you know, I'll try to help you in any way I can. But you need to reach out to me. Make sure that you're contacting me when you're stuck. You're not sure about something. This is something that I've been trying to encourage all of you to do from the very beginning, is to make sure that you're reaching out to me. I want everyone to finish. I want everyone to do well for this semester. I want everyone to complete your thesis statement and do the best job that you possibly can, right? That's what I'm expecting everyone to do, is to finish, to complete the course. And so make sure wherever you are in the process, make sure that you're asking and seeking feedback when you need it. Now, the due date for the final thesis paper is May 21st. You need to complete your final paper by 2 p.m. on Friday, May 21st. All right, this is going to be our final deadline. There's nothing else can be done after 2 p.m. on May 21st. Okay, this is the final deadline of your paper. All right, this is the deadline that's required in order to do the mock presentations. Now, the mock presentations are going to begin May 24th through June 4th. What are mock presentations? It's basically a practice. You're going to present as if you were presenting your final oral defense, but it's practice. And it's only going to be in front of me. It's going to be online, obviously, but I will be there, right, for all the presentations. And each of you will be expected to observe a few presentations of your classmates. So let me explain a little bit now this, because I know this is a month out or more, but I want you to check your schedules. All right, you're going to need to be available a little bit during the time of the mock presentations. I'm going to post a schedule at the beginning of May. Okay, when we come back, one of the first things I'm going to share with you is a schedule of the mock presentations to show when you're going to present and when I'm going to ask that you also observe your classmates. The students who participate in the mock presentations do much better in the final oral defense. They feel more confident, they feel more relaxed, and that's the purpose, is for you to go through that first time presenting, get those jitters out of the way, you know, the nervousness. I mean, we're always nervous when we're presenting. That's normal, okay? But you're going to feel a lot more confident when you do the oral defense. You have spent more time with this material than anyone else, including me, your tutor. So you should be prepared, but also feel that you have what you need and that you're ready to present your results. And so in the mock presentations, you might be asked, for example, to present on Monday, May 24th, and you may be asked to observe that day your classmates, because we'll probably have 4 or 5 presentations per day. So you'll be asked to observe the day that you present, along with those of your classmates who are presenting that same day, and then one other day, probably the day after, right? So that you can observe at least, I would say, 8 or 9 presentations along with your own presentation, so that you can start to see what to consider to improve or make changes to your own performance. All right, so when I give feedback, many of the things that I talk about, I say the same thing to different students. And so you'll start to see some patterns and things that some of them might apply to your own case, some may not. But I'll present the schedule for the mock presentations at the beginning of the May so that you can plan accordingly. Okay, so again, probably 2 days you'll be asked to participate, whether by presenting your mock presentation or by observing your classmates. Okay, this is going to take us through June 4th. All right, we have a lot of us in class in this class this semester, so we'll take up most of the last 2 weeks of class for this semester doing our mock presentations. Again, in order to do the mock presentation, you need to finish your paper by 2 p.m. on May 21st. If you do not finish by this due date, then you're not able to present the mock presentation. You can still present the oral defense, however. Okay? Everyone is entitled and has a right to present the oral defense, regardless if you finish the paper or not. Okay? Regardless if you pass the course or not, everyone is entitled to present the final oral defense. But the mock presentations is contingent on whether or not you finish the final draft by May 21st. Now, the oral defense, this is going to be now your final presentation. It's going to be online. It's going to be in Teams. And it's going to occur between June 7th and June 18th. This is going to be during exams week. Okay, so this is going to be when you present your own presentation. And I'm still working out the details. It's going to be online, but you may invite guests to attend your oral defense. You know, you can invite your family or friends to attend your oral defense, or some students choose not to invite anyone, and that's fine also. That's completely up to you. The mock presentations, we're going to have some of our classmates in to observe, but the oral defense is by invitation only. We'll have 3 examiners, and and I'll be there, of course. So the 3 examiners, I'll be there. You're going to present, and then anyone else that you want to invite, I'll send out a link, or I'll provide you the link, and you can send the link where other people can attend your oral defense. This is for the final oral defense. All right, so this is kind of where we're going and what you can expect for the rest of the semester. Please make sure you keep this schedule handy. Make sure that you're aware of this final due date. It's very important. And yeah, this is how we're going to conclude for this semester. Any questions about the schedule overall based on some of what I've been talking about here?
Hi, teacher. I
Hi.
have a question. It's about the oral defense. Is it going to be in Spanish or in English?
The oral defense will be in English.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Your presentation will all be in English. Now, I know some of you might have instruments that that you translated. Maybe you presented it in Spanish and then you translated it, or maybe the interview was in one language or the other, and that's a different issue. But yes, the actual oral defense itself will be in English. You'll present for 20 minutes, and then you'll have 10 minutes of a question and answering session with the examiners. Okay, so each examiner typically will ask a question or two about what you presented, and you'll have an opportunity to answer those questions. In the mock presentation, it'll be similar. You'll have 20 minutes, and I will pretend that I'm the examiner and ask you questions as if I were an examiner, so that you can, again, you know what to expect. I feel like that's my responsibility, to try to put you through a situation where you can be confident that that's basically what you can expect when you give your oral defense. Okay, any other questions?
Me, teacher.
Hello? Yes, go ahead.
So, yeah, for the oral defense, so there is no chance for us to do it like face to face.
Yeah, God, and there's nothing more than for me just wish that I could say, yeah, it would be great. Yes, we're going to have it face to face. And I wish it were face to face. It would be better to be face to face. But at this point, I don't see how that can happen. So we need to plan on it being online. And, one of the things that I want to help you with the mock presentation also is to help you go through the process of getting online, having that presentation ready to go, and, try to help you with the technological aspect of it. If anyone is concerned about the technological part of it, just reach out to me so that we can try to adapt and see, what we can do. But I can't say that we can have anything face to face unless I get some sort of notification from top down. I don't see how that's going to happen. We don't know almost week to week technically, what the university stance is going to be. But based on past experience, my assumption is that we're going to be online for the rest of the semester. Unfortunately. So
we can't get any information because, for example, in my case, besides the concern of the technology and the internet failing, is that I don't really have a place to make the oral defense. There is a lot of noise and etc. So
okay,
we can't get any permission for that.
well, I can certainly check. If you guys want to put together a letter with your names, with your concerns, I will take it to the head of the department and see what I can do. But I would need this letter as soon as possible, like
Okay.
within a week, even if during the break. Just send me the letter, but it needs to have all of your the names that of those of you who have those concerns. Needs to be, first of all, write out the letter, of course, right? And then at the bottom of the letter, write out your names, like the list of your names and your signatures. Okay, both, right? Your full name. I would include your ID and your signature. And I would address it to the head of the department. Okay, so address it to the head of the department, a paragraph or two, whatever, a letter stating your concerns. And then at the bottom, a list of those of you who have these concerns. Now, no one should be pressured. This is voluntary to be on the list or not. And, I have no idea what the outcome will be, but I certainly will present it to the head of the department. All right. If you present a list of that kind, and we'll see. And now we probably won't get a response until the 1st of May, obviously, because everybody will probably be on break. I wouldn't expect to get a response back, but I do think if you can present the letter within a week, I will send it right away and then hope to get a response that first week of May. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And who else is going to be with you as
Okay, the examiners are scheduled. The examiners who, and just so you know, remember that to grade for this class, the grades that you're going to receive, you're basically going to get 3 grades. You're going to get a grade from me, your tutor, for the process, and that's going to include basically everything that we've done except for the oral defense and your final written paper. All right, so the oral defense is going to be graded by 3 examiners. Okay, the examiners are going to be Dr. Luis Humberto, Maestro Tonio Torres, and Maestro Fernando Gomez. So those are going to be the 3 examiners for the oral defense. All 3 examiners you'll receive a grade from all 3. And your final oral defense will be an average of the grades of all 3 examiners. And then one of the examiners will be assigned to your thesis paper. So one examiner, one of your teachers will grade the written paper.
Okay, so one of the people that you mentioned is going to grade the final paper?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Teacher, it's me, Sam.
Yes.
I have a question.
Mhm.
If by any case, well, I totally agree if my other classmates want to go ahead and do the presentation in person, but if the head of the department says that it's mandatory, is there any chance I can stick to the online because obvious circumstances with me?
Yes, and so that's something that that is going to be discussed, of course, right? That's going to be part of the decision what to do in both cases. Those who have a problem presenting online, or those who have a problem meeting online. So I understand, Sam, your concern, and we'll clarify that as well. That will be, of course, a consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Any other questions up to this point?
Me, teacher, good morning.
Good morning.
I just have a couple of questions. Could you please provide us like a guide or an example about the data analysis and the results and discussion as you want the paper, please?
Yeah, in fact, I haven't even started yet. the data analysis. So yeah, I'm totally planning today on talking about the data analysis. At this point, I just wanted to just check if there were any other questions based on the schedule or anything that I've talked about up to this point. I'm not going to mention much about the results and discussion section. Like I said, I will present a video at the very beginning of May, okay, when I think that would be the time to be thinking seriously about the results and discussion section. I don't think we should be thinking seriously about it at this point, which might sound strange, but I want us to focus now on the data analysis. Okay, so let me go ahead and start with the data analysis. If anyone else has any questions or they come up later about about the schedule or anything else that we've talked about or any concerns, yeah, just reach out to me afterwards. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. I shared a link in the chat with the notes that I want to talk to you about. And so if you want to follow along, that's fine. If you just want to listen, that's fine too. But please feel free to refer to the notes, of course. And later I'm going to upload the video of today, the recording, to the same page so that you have both the recording and also the notes together. Got a lot of information here. Try to either make notes and think of, as you think of questions, either jump in, interrupt me, ask as I'm presenting, or you can ask at the end. All right, so we've talked about the schedule. The method section we talked about in terms of creating sections, talking about the participants. We need to be able to express who these people are. Who are the teachers? What are the characteristics of these teachers and students and administrators and the schools? This is where you are going to describe your participants, number one. And number two, you need to describe how you chose the participants. Okay, did you do a screening questionnaire? Was it based on some characteristic of the teacher or the group or the school that made you say these are the participants that are especially designed for my answering my research questions? We talked about the instruments. Now the instruments is where you can talk about what the instruments are and also what the purpose is for applying these instruments. Right? So this is another consideration. Why do these instruments help you answer your research questions? Also in the instrument section, if you're borrowing an instrument from another study, this is where you'll need to include a citation. Right? So a citation saying, this is where I'm borrowing this instrument, whether I'm modifying it or I'm using it exactly the way it appeared in another study. This is where I got the instrument. Right? So this would be a case where you could have some citations in your methods section. Try to avoid a lot of definitions. In fact, there really is no room in the methods section for many definitions, if any definitions, okay? It really is about describing the participants and describing the instruments and justifying the instruments. In the procedure, this is the third section, is going to be where you describe the process, right? So imagine that I want to replicate your study. I want to do the same study that you did. Tell me what I need to know. Tell the reader how you collected the data. What came first? What came second? And so on. Now, in the methods section, still try to stay in the third person. The methods section is where probably the passive voice will be more appropriate, right? Many of you may have received some notes, especially from Grammarly, about avoiding the passive voice. When you look at your videos, when you receive feedback from me and you're looking at the videos from Grammarly, make sure you're addressing most, if not all, of the cases where it says passive voice. Try to write more in the active voice. But in the methods section, it's going to be a little bit more common and acceptable to write in the passive voice, but do write in the third person, please. So no I's and no U's. We need to try to stay in the third person. In this third section, in addition to describing the process, we'll need to mention something about the data analysis. And this is going to be the part of the method section at this point that you're probably not going to be able to complete, and that's fine. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's not complete at this point because we're just getting into the data analysis right now. But do try to have the method section completed by next Friday so that you can really concentrate on the data analysis. Now, to review, I've listed here the different data sources. Remember, one of the key aspects of qualitative research, and all of you are doing to some degree a qualitative research, is triangulation. Triangulation meaning we need at least 3 different data sources to talk about whatever it is that we want to talk about. So this is just a list of some of the more common types of data sources that may apply to you. Of course, you don't need all of these, but again, at least 3 is going to be a good idea to include. We have classroom observations, semi-structured interviews, and that could be for teachers, students, administrators, parents, focus groups, stimulated recalls, lesson plans, syllabus, school policy, a mission statement, a vision statement, any student work. It could be homework or assignments that they completed, teaching materials, right? And this could be either teaching materials that were used in a live class or in, let's say, in a virtual classroom, a learning management system, right? These could be images, audios, videos, stationery, any papers or pens, right? That, or any other, maybe, brochures that they created, right? That could also be materials, thinking, back in the day when we had face-to-face classes, right? So these could all be different types of data sources. Information and communication technology. So anything that you find online, for example, in social media, in WhatsApp, any type of text that was exchanged maybe between teachers and students, right? That's all potential data sources. This is all potential information that you could include to answer your research questions. Now, the design types, all right? Now, I'm not going to dive deep into this. I want to try, when I was putting together my notes last night, I was trying to talk about enough things that I think hopefully will be useful, but I want to tell you or explain one type that actually no one will do, and that is inferential statistics. All right, so most of you, in fact, all of you are doing descriptive studies. All of you are going to have qualitative information, but inferential statistics requires quantitative information that infers, okay? And so I'm not even really going to get into inferential statistics. We're not going to do any type of regression analysis or any of those types of studies, okay? We're not going to do correlative studies. We're going to stick to descriptive studies. You can think of your study as being exploratory, perhaps. You can think of your study as perhaps explanatory, where you're explaining. So here we have descriptive, exploratory, and explanatory. Now, I'm going to be throwing out some terminologies here, and the takeaway here is as you're getting this information and maybe going back to this information after today's discussion, I want to give you enough terminology that you can use to include in your methods section. And when you're describing, what kind of study did you do, right? Think of that question. How would you answer that question? What kind of study did you do? You could say, well, I did a descriptive study to look into this. I did an exploratory study to look at this. I did an explanatory study to look at this. And you sometimes, it depends on what the focus is. And in some of your cases, you answered how and why, right? But think of what the main thing was. Like, what is the most that you're going to speak about? Let's say that most of what you're going to discuss is talking about the how. Maybe you talk a little bit about the why. Well, then your study is more exploratory, perhaps. right? Or maybe it's really descriptive and it's less, you talk about the how, but you're also really describing with a lot of detail. The descriptive aspect of your study is going to be a constant. It doesn't matter if it's exploratory or explanatory. You're going to be describing a lot, whatever it is that you're looking at, that you're analyzing. Okay, but this is, I think, one way to look at your study in terms of what, how, and why, thinking of it in terms of being descriptive, exploratory, and or explanatory. Now, field research, I have a site up, I think. No, I don't. So let's see if I can open that up. All right, when you think about field research, all right, all of you are doing, in different degrees, you're doing a field research. And what this means is that you are observing something that's going on. You're trying to observe a phenomenon. And we're going to use the term also phenomenology. We'll come back to that here in a minute. But think of your study as looking at a classroom situation and you're trying to understand some phenomena, something that's going on in a quote-unquote real world, right? And this is not, you didn't design an experimental design choosing teachers to do a very specific thing. This is just basically looking at what they usually do already. So most of you are doing direct observation. That is, you're not doing an intervention. You are simply observing what they normally would do. This is called a direct observation. Some of you might have had to do an intervention. This is called the participant observation. Now, participant observation is where you are not only observing, but to some degree, you are also participating. And that's where the intervention comes up. If you're making suggestions and you're talking with the teacher and making suggestions about a particular material or a particular teaching technique and trying to, in some ways, manipulate the situation because you need to in order to answer your research questions, then you're doing what's called a participant observation. So these are terms that you can use in your description of what kind of study that you've done. You can also look at your study as being a case study. So a case study is typically when you choose a particular set of participants for a particular reason. Maybe they are different in some way, they are unique in some way, and you've chosen them for a particular reason. This kind of relates to what I mentioned earlier about the participants. Why did you choose these participants? Well, this relates to your justification and how, of what kind of case study this is, right? Because maybe these teachers are different, or maybe they face a particular challenge or difficulty for some reason, and this is why you chose them. All right, so a case study might be something that you include in your methods section, in your description of what kind of study it is. Okay, you might mention participant observation, or you might mention direct observation. You're not going to mention both. It's usually going to be one or the other in terms of the type of observation, but you could also mention case study. Most of you, if not all of you, also have done qualitative interviews. Okay, so we've been talking about both semi-structured interviews, as well as I know some of you have done structured interviews. So that is also part of your description. Now, we're not going to get into ethnography, and we won't get into that in today's discussion, but that's certainly also part of what's considered field research. All right, so take a look at this page. I've shared a link in the notes. If you feel you need to review any of this information to get just a little bit more detailed or to clarify your doubts, take a look at this page. But these are some aspects of field research that pertain to most of your studies. Phenomenology. This is a link to a video. It's basically 3 minutes And this kind of goes over phenomenology. I'm not going to play the video here because I'm actually recording this. And yeah, don't want to get into issues with copyright. But basically, phenomenology is you observing a phenomena, something that naturally occurs. And your job is to try to understand the lived experiences of the participants. So in this case, teachers, what were their experiences with that situation? What were the experiences of the students in the situation that you observed? And you're really trying to get an understanding of what they experienced. Okay, so essentially a phenomenology is the study of lived experiences. And to the degree that you do not influence that experience, right? That's the point. That's the idea. So some of you might classify your studies as being based in phenomenology. Remember that when you're choosing your design type, right, and you're starting your analysis, you're going to be comparing and contrasting points of comparison. You're going to be comparing either within a group or between a group. It could be comparing students. It could be comparing teachers. It could be comparing different teaching techniques based on some other aspect. It could be comparing the way that the students feel about some aspect of the experience that you observed. All right. As you get into the data analysis, some of these points of comparison will be clear at the beginning of the process. Some of these points of comparison might emerge. There might be some things that you didn't consider because perhaps you weren't even aware of it until you started doing the data analysis. So keep an open mind. Always ask yourself, what could or what should I be comparing and contrasting? And be open to adapting and making decisions, right, to answer this question as you go through the data collection or data analysis, the data analysis process. All right, so this is very typical in a qualitative study, is constantly adapting your the ways that you collect the data, the way that you analyze, the way that you're going to present, because at the end of the day, your job is very simple. It's to answer your research questions. But it's not just to answer your research questions, it's to try to answer your research questions in a way that presents something that was interesting, something that was unexpected, that was perhaps surprising. Maybe it's even something that goes against the theory. All right, this is not an exercise in how you can try to find data that only agrees with what you have in your theory. No, this is where you, as an independent mind, sharing your critical thinking skills, can determine, all right, what does this information mean? My analysis tells me this. It's either similar to what the experts say, or perhaps it's different. But this is how it's different. This is why it's different. This is when it's different. And you present your case. You present your ideas. So constantly be thinking about what you're comparing and contrasting as you go through the process. The research design, all of you are going to be doing, in some sense, you're going to be including qualitative information. Everyone will have, to different degrees, qualitative data to analyze. And that's what I'm going to be talking about here in a few minutes when we get into coding. Coding is going to be related to qualitative information. Okay? Now, some of you will also combine qualitative information with quantitative information. This is called the mixed methods. Now, how do you know if you're doing a mixed methods or if you're just doing a qualitative study, sorry. The mixed methods includes quantitative information in such things like finding averages, frequencies. Okay, frequencies, if you're trying to find out how often a teacher spoke in the L1 versus the L2, right? That's more quantitative. Now, when you ask the teacher, why did you speak in L1? Why did you speak in L2 in this particular case? And they tell you through an interview or a focus group or a stimulated recall, Now you're also including qualitative information. So notice here, the same phenomena. We've got L1, L2. Does a teacher speak L1 or L2? All right, that's the thing we're analyzing. And we're going to express it. We're going to share those results in two different ways. The quantitative information based on averages, how long or how many words or how many times did the teacher switch between the two, and his or her explanation, right? And then we probably combine it with an observation to see, have a third point to triangulate the information through an observation. That would be a third point of view, a third data point or a data source. All right, so either a qualitative study or mixed methods, all right? So think about your own study and ask yourself which of those two applies to my study. It may or may not be clear at this point. It probably should be, but if it's not, make sure you continue through the data analysis process, and at some point it should be clear, and certainly by the time you present your study, your oral defense, it should be clear in your mind, and you should describe your study as being either qualitative or mixed methods. Now, the descriptive statistics, all right, when we talk about averages and frequency, all right, this relates to figuring this, we call this the central tendencies. Maybe you talked a little bit about this in your research class in prior semesters. But descriptive statistics, essentially frequencies, averages, ranges, highs and lows. You might use charts, right, to show this information, this quantitative information. This is quantitative information that can be used in a mixed methods study of the type that some of you are doing. All right, so these are the ideas here that I put together for the design types when trying to figure out, well, how do I explain what kind of study I'm doing? What's my research design? This information relates to that question. Now, the rest of what I want to talk about here talks about what's called coding. Now, coding, again, specifically relates to qualitative information. It does not relate, well, yeah, it's not used to analyze quantitative information, okay? Now, they can be related and they can support each other, certainly. But coding, what we're going to talk about here right now, is related to what to do with the qualitative information. Remember, the qualitative information going up to the data sources, the classroom observations, the interviews, the focus groups, the stimulator recall, the lesson plans, the syllabus, the policies, all of this data is qualitative information. The quantitative information might be questionnaires with Likert scale, right? Or closed questions. Okay, that kind of information could be quantitative. But most of these examples up here, student work, right? Much of this is going to be qualitative. All right, so the first thing that you need to do when you think about starting the process of coding qualitative information is what's called transcribing. Transcribing is necessary to code qualitative data. This is why I've been asking everyone, please make sure that you have recordings of your class. Because if you don't have recordings of your class, if you don't have recordings of interviews, if you don't have the recordings of the focus group, if you don't have recordings of your stimulated recall, it's impossible to do the transcribing. You need those recordings to do the coding. All right, and before I forget, I want to make sure that you guys know that the recordings of the classroom the classroom observations that you witnessed, If you need recordings, it doesn't matter if you record the class or if the teacher records the class. And even if the teacher has recordings from prior classes that you were not able to observe, those can be used as well. As long as you have the recording and you go back and watch the recording or listen to the recording and you can do the transcribing, then it's all good. All right, so transcribing is necessary to code the qualitative data. You can transcribe audios. You can transcribe videos. Of course, only transcribe what's related to the research questions. So you might have a whole class, a 50-minute class, and depending on your research questions, maybe only one activity that lasted 15 minutes really relates to your research questions. So do you need to transcribe the whole class? No. You only transcribe the class, the part of the class that relates to your research questions. Okay, so again, this is going to depend on your focus, your objective, and your research questions. So you transcribe audios and videos. Audios and videos can come from a variety of data sources. Okay, so audios and videos can come from interviews. They can come from focus groups, stimulator recalls, classroom observations. Audios and videos created by those outside of the class, used either by the teacher or the student or any other participant. Now, what does that mean? Audios or videos created by anyone else outside of the class. Think of YouTube. If videos were used in the class by the teacher, but the teacher didn't create the video came from an outside source, from YouTube, or maybe the students brought it in. These are all potential data sources that could be included or necessary to transcribe. Do you need to transcribe the whole video? No, not necessarily. Depends on your research questions. Maybe in that video that the teacher used that he or she got from YouTube, there's only 3 or 4 minutes of video that directly relates to your research question. So again, when you're asking the question, well, what do I transcribe? It all depends on your research questions. The last thing here, we also have audios and videos created by the teacher or the students, right? So in some cases, students might, as a homework assignment, need to create a video. It's possible. Maybe that's another video, that's another source of qualitative data that would require transcribing. So before you code, and we haven't talked about what coding is yet, but just know before you do coding, you need to transcribe. You can't code unless you transcribe. You can't transcribe unless you have a recording. All right. Now, transcribing also includes text. Right? So what I've been talking about so far is all related to audios and videos. But if you have, let's say, text from WhatsApp, you have some interactions or some exchanges between teachers and students in WhatsApp, and it's in text form, okay? Then you can transcribe. You don't need to transcribe that, okay? You transcribe because it's in a video or an audio, right? So if it's in text form, you don't need to transcribe the text because the text is there, okay? You're basically, you code text is what I'm trying to say, all right? When you code information, when you code qualitative information, you have to code text. So if you already have text from, let's say, Google Classroom, you got access to that and you have text in there, right? Then you just copy and paste that text and analyze and code that text. But if you have a video in Google Classroom, then you would need to transcribe that video into text form in order to be able to do the coding. All right. So qualitative data from text does not require transcribing. All right, but you should organize it. Organize it so that you can systematically begin the coding process. All right, so first step in to begin the coding process is to transcribe whatever needs to be transcribed and then organize text that needs to be coded. Now, the coding of qualitative data. What does coding mean? It simply means, for the purposes of doing research, it is simply a way of labeling or assigning a name that describes something, that describes a text, that describes some kind of linguistic constituent. So when you look at a text, right, again, this depends on your research questions, but if you're looking at just general ideas about, let's say, what a person feels, then you might begin by looking at individual words, coding words, and assigning a label or assigning a name that describes the word from the text. Remember, the text is going to come from your transcribing of videos and audios and or come from any text that you came across, whether it's from a syllabus, a lesson plan, Google Classroom, and so on. But coding is simply assigning a name. It's labeling things. It's to describe them. Now, what kind of data should be coded? We talked a little bit about this already. Here are some examples. The classroom observations, semi-structured interviews, focus groups, and stimulated recalls. Okay, we mentioned this a couple of times. The extensive list is up here at the top. Okay, most of this information is qualitative information that can be coded and analyzed as qualitative information. Now, let me talk about the coding process. I want to give you some steps that you can follow to do the coding process. This is how you can go about doing the coding process. All right, so think of coding in terms of cycles. Typically, there are 3 to 4 cycles. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of 3 cycles that you might consider. So step number 1, determine the linguistic constituent. Determine the thing that you want to analyze to begin the first cycling of coding. It could be a word. It could be a morphological language constituent, like if you're looking at prefixes and suffixes. It could be a group of words, like a phrase. It could be a clause. It could be a sentence. It could be a group of sentences. It could even possibly be a paragraph. So imagine you're selecting one of those. You're selecting either individual words or phrases or complete sentences, and then you're labeling it. You're giving a name to that text. Now, this first step is very important because based on your research questions, you really need to make the best decision about how specific this language, this linguistic constituent should be. Should it be a word? Should it be a phrase? Should it be a sentence? Should it be a paragraph? Because when you do coding, you're starting with something specific. And we'll see here in the cycles, we're going to start specific and then work general, go general. So we don't want to start too general. Okay, if you're going to make a mistake about being too general, too specific, it's better to be too specific because we can always go general. But if you start too general, we can never go back to being more specific. Okay, we lose the data, we lose the analysis. So think of what level do you begin with, right? And it's going to depend in large part on your research questions. Now, note, too often students will begin too general with the first level of coding, and this is a very common mistake. We just say, okay, I'm gonna label this whole paragraph when maybe there's different aspects to label within that same paragraph. All right, if you're trying to analyze to see how students feel, if they're motivated about something. If you start the cycling process at the paragraph level, it's possible that within that same paragraph, 2 or 3 different students, or maybe the same student, the same participant, mentioned 3 different aspects of motivation. But because you labeled the whole paragraph, you only gave it one name, when actually within that paragraph, there are 3 different categories or names that you should be assigning. So that's what I mean by try to start specific, right, in this first level, this first cycle. So before you start the first cycle, you need to determine what is the linguistic constituent. What's the language, the piece of language that I'm going to start with in my first level of coding. Step number 2, we're going to start our first cycle of coding now. So once you have chosen the linguistic constituent, let's say it's a word, then you can begin coding. Now, I would suggest there are different ways of doing this, and of course, you choose what works for you. But I think the easiest way to do it, honestly, is to use Microsoft Word and to use the comment feature to add the labels. Now, I don't know if you can use color coding. It really depends on how many codes that you're using. When you start with your first level coding, it's possible to have a long list of codes, right? You might have many, many codes, many words or labels. And depending on the color scheme, the panoramic of, or the different varieties of colors that you're going to have available, it may or may not be useful. It would be different if you're only going to include 4 or 5 codes, but you're going to have many more than 4 or 5 codes. All right, you could have, you're going to have a lot of codes. And you should have a lot of codes, right, in this first cycle. And when you code, you're labeling things, and you're not only choosing what to label, but you're also establishing those labels, all right? What are the names that are going to describe the text that you're analyzing? Now, when you are creating the codes, what I would recommend is to use Microsoft Word and bring in those texts into Microsoft Word and begin label. Just select the word or select the text, and then in the comment, write the label, write the code. We call these, this is the code. We're going to call this the initial codes. The initial codes are going to be the codes that you develop in the first cycle of the coding process. So just write out the names of the codes. And what I would recommend also is having a separate document. In Microsoft, I would create a Microsoft Word document, and I would list out the codes that you're using as you use them. That's what I would have 2 files open. One Word file where you're doing the coding, and then a second Word document where you're adding to the list and you're maintaining the list. So as you go along, you can keep referring back to the list. If this works out better to do it on Excel, if you want, so that you can organize, you can alphabetize, for example, it might be, useful so that you can easily find those codes so that you don't forget, like, have I already used that code? Or maybe this code would be better if I call it something else. I think the coding list, if you develop it as you go along, it will help you keep track of those codes so that you're maintaining those codes based on your research questions. Okay, so try to maintain a code list. You will include a code list as an appendix at the end of your document in the appendices section. So in the methods section, again, don't worry about it now for the next week, but when you completely finish the analysis part, we're going to include your code list, your coding list, in the form of an outline at the very end of your thesis paper. And you'll reference it in the methods section. Under the procedure in the data analysis, you can say information was coded based on a coding list. See Appendix E for example. All right, so we're here, maintain a code list as you move throughout the process. Now these codes could emerge or they could be predetermined. So these codes could be labels that come from your theory. Maybe some experts were mentioning, and maybe you mentioned it in your theory, certain labels that would be appropriate for initial coding. So these would be called predetermined coding. This is called a deductive approach because it's based on theory and you're using it in your labeling in the first cycle of the coding process. But you could also, you could also develop codes as they emerge. You create codes that are most appropriate for the process of labeling or describing the text that you're analyzing. And this is really important too. I am a fan of the emergent coding system because sometimes you can't anticipate certain codes until you get into doing this analysis. So just know that you can do both. You can have predetermined codes or you can have codes emerge. You can create codes. You can create names and labels based on what you're analyzing. Okay, I just mentioned here predetermined codes come from the theory, and emergent codes are just those that the researcher deemed necessary. Okay. Codes can also, this is important here, codes can also come from the data itself and not the researcher. This is called in vivo coding. In vivo coding. Now, what this means is you're actually using the code that comes from the text. The text and the code are the same. All right, so that's also another way that you can code. The actual coding, the labeling, or the description of the text is actually coming from the word. If a teacher is being interviewed and he or she says, I feel stressed because I don't get support from the school. All right, the support from the school, I'll transcribe that and I'll select support from the school. My code would be school support. That's my code, school support. If I want to be more general, I could just say support, but notice that I put school support because maybe later the same teacher says, you know what, I also feel stressed because I don't get support from home. All right, so that's a different kind of support. So I would label that, I would transcribe it and identify it as home support or support from home. So that would be two labels that would be considered in vivo because I am actually using the codes, the actual labels that are coming from the text itself. Okay, so in vivo is a possibility, or you could come up with codes, come up with your own labels that describe what it is that you're analyzing. Codes can be descriptive, they can be structural, they can be procedural, they can be based on value. So the codes depends on your research questions. If you're researching, let's say, teachers who are implementing a particular technique, and you're looking at how they are preparing and looking at those techniques throughout, let's say, a week through task-based learning, for example, some of the codes might relate to preparation, the technique, the type of technique that would be descriptive, and then the technique might lead to some sort of method. The method might relate to something else. The codes can be focused on type, they can be descriptive. If you're thinking about procedural types of codes, then you could be looking at the teaching techniques and the different ways that the teacher implemented those teaching techniques. Maybe those techniques involved, let's say, student participation first, and then a description of something, of, let's say, a grammatical structure, right? That would be procedural, and you could use codes to describe that procedure. Maybe other times the teaching technique involved first more the teacher kind of explaining and writing on the board something, an explanation, and then some sort of activity with the students. That could be labeled as a procedural type of code, right? So these are different types of codes, different ways that you can think of in terms of when you are determining the types of codes you're using. Are they descriptive? Are they structural? Are they procedural? Are they based on value, etc.? Right? You might want to visit this page that's called Qualitative Data Coding 101, and underneath here we see some explanations of what I'm talking about here in terms of the types of codes. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways that you can come up with the system of coding, of labeling, right? The main point here is that you're choosing the process and the types of coding that most relate to answering your research questions. So this is your first cycle of coding. This is the one that might take the most amount of work, the most amount of time. This is the first attempt to look at and begin labeling. If you rush through this first cycle, the second and third cycle will suffer, right? The second cycle depends on how good you can do the first cycle. So you're just going to create labels, and don't worry about how many you're going to need, or just start labeling. Just transcribe it, put them all together. And when you are transcribing, you're bringing together the text, you're following the same coding process for all data sources. Say that one more time. The coding process, what I'm talking about here, the cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, determining the linguistic constituent, all of this. This applies to all of the data sources. So you're not going to separate the process of coding by type. You're not going to lump together all the interviews and come up with their own codes and then transcribe and analyze your classroom observations and have specific codes for that. No, you're going to be consistent with the coding process across all data sources. You're going to use the same coding list to apply to all data sources: the classroom observations, the teacher interviews, the student interviews. It's exactly the same process, labeling, coming up with your code list that applies to all the data sources. Now, once you finish the first cycle, okay, once you finish the first cycle and you have a long list, at this point you should have a really long list on your code list. You probably have pages and pages of a Word document with comments along the side that indicate the codes. If it helps to come up with a numeric system, like an outline, what I usually try to use like an outline format for the coding list, right? That's fine, but you're going to have a long list of codes at the end of your first cycle. To begin the second cycle, now you're going to look at all of the initial codes. Remember, we're going to use the term initial codes to refer to the codes that you created in the first cycle process. The second cycle is going to take those initial codes now, right? So imagine you have your long list of code list. You're going to take those initial codes and you're going to categorize. You're going to group together those initial codes. So some of these initial codes over here, they're going to go into this category, and you're going to create a name for that category. It's, again, you're still labeling. It's just now you're grouping now the initial codes, and you're going to group them together, and we're going to call it categories. You're going to group another set of initial codes, and you're going to create another category, and you're going to create the name. The name can come from the theory. The name can be emergent. Or you could combine those two in the sense that you could have some categories that come from the theory, some categories might be created on your own. Right? But basically you want to find a home, you want to categorize, you want to group all of the initial codes into some category. Now, you might find cases where maybe one code has just one special category and there's really nothing else that fits into that category. That's okay. That's all right. Because basically that's telling you that, yeah, okay, maybe there, that is a different category, but you probably will find other categories that are going to be more relevant, right? But at this point, it doesn't matter. You're just putting things into categories. You're not analyzing it any more than that. It's just grouping into categories. This is called the second cycle. And we've now converted initial codes into categories. I would continue working in Word. I would copy and paste. It's just a matter of moving text around. Copy and paste the initial codes into their own categories and create a category. So let me pull up a Word document and give you kind of a rough idea of what this might look like. All right, so imagine so here, these are my codes. And it's really no more complicated than this. I would just create a list. Doesn't matter if there's a lot of space, what doesn't matter. You're just making a list. Now, where are these initial? These are my initial codes. I got pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages, on and on. Okay. These are my codes. Now, where do these come from? Well, in another Word document, I transcribed and I have all the text that comes from the interviews and focus groups, and I have text that came from maybe some exchanges from WhatsApp, and I selected and labeled those texts, and these are the names in the comment section of that document. These are all the codes. These are my initial codes. Now I'm ready for the second cycle process. So what I would do, I would create another Word document. Again, you find the process that works for you. But what I would do is I would create a second document. Okay, so there are my categories. And, sorry. And let's see, up here, give it initial codes. Okay, so these are my initial codes. And I'm going to say, maybe, hello. Okay, what's going on here? There we go. So let's say then now I'm in my second cycle. I'm going to say, okay, these codes, I'm going to cut and paste, right? Because I want to remove these codes. Now notice that these codes, and this is, I know it's a bad example, but these are all different codes, okay? These are different codes. Right? So I wouldn't worry about organizing the codes in the first cycle. Just list the codes, and I would do it alphabetically, just so that you don't repeat, or maybe the same code would mean the same thing, but you worded it slightly differently. So my suggestion would be to keep these alphabetized. If you can do this in Excel, and you can, that's fine. I'm just trying to give you an idea about how to do this, but keep it alphabetized. And let's say you're in your second cycle coding, I would cut and paste. So I would remove those from this list, and then I would bring them into here, and then I would say, this is one category. And I would do it like this. I would say, I would do this and create an outline like that. Right? So what this means is all these codes that came from my initial code list, now I've categorized these like this. Now, here is, I think, a mistake that some researchers will do. They will first start with thinking about the category. They actually start to try to categorize while they code in this first cycle. And my suggestion would be to try not to do that. Just think labeling. Just give it a very specific name and don't worry about anything else. Just find it a very simple code that relates to the text that obviously relates to your research questions, but keep it really simple. Don't organize it yet in the initial code. This is the first cycle. Once you start the second cycle and you have a long list of words here, then it's like a puzzle. It's just copy and pasting, bringing these together. So let's say, these codes and I don't know, these codes here and these codes. I'm going to cut those and bring those into my other document. All right, so there are my codes. Notice I got them from different parts of the list from the initial code list, but now I'm going to have my second category. And for the purposes of this discussion, I'm putting the word category, but you would add a label. You would describe it however you need to describe it. How would you describe these codes? And similarly, how would you describe these codes? Right? So I would do the same thing and I would create an outline essentially. And as you're doing this, you're actually creating your code list. This is going to be when you finish this process, this is what you're going to include at the end of your thesis paper in your appendices. And so on, okay, etc. All right, so I would follow this process, and this is our second level of coding. Okay, again, these are all initial codes. This is our category, and all you're doing is labeling. The labeling can come from the theory, or it can emerge. You can create these labels as you go along. Now, the next step, step 4, guess what? We have one more cycle. We're going to follow the same process as step 3 as what we did in the second cycle, but guess what? We're now going to group categories into themes. So let's imagine that we have one, 2, and 3. I guess I should have done this beforehand, but 4. But you can see how I'm going through this process. This is how you would be doing this as you are going through the different cycles. Now you're going to have, at the end of the day here, you're going to have several categories. Now the next step is I would create another document. Again, you can do this in Word or Excel or any other program that you feel comfortable with. And here's what I would do. I would say, okay, category 1 and category 6, and category 4. I'm going to cut and paste that here. And guess what I'm going to do here? You probably can guess what I'm going to do here. I say theme 1. Yep, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do, where is it? Do that. Do that. So you see what I'm doing here. I have now my categories, and these again are labels. Okay, I'm not going to use the word category in my my process. All right, I'm going to give it names that either going to come from the theory or not. They could be emergent. Okay. Okay, it's not working here, but hopefully you get the idea here. See if I can. For some reason it's not allowing me, but hopefully you get the idea here. So you're going to have a category 6 that all fall underneath this theme. You're going to create the theme. The theme can come from the theory, or it can be emergent. You can create it yourself. It doesn't matter. But the idea is that these labels, these categories, fit under this theme. And you would follow the same process for level 3. You might have, at the end of the day, 2 or 3 themes, perhaps. Okay? So notice you have initial codes, categories, and themes. And at the end of the day, you might have 3 or 4 themes. You might have, several pages, but this is your coding list. This is the list. When you finish the process in outline form, this is the coding list that you created to do the coding process. And I would include this coding list in your appendices section at the end of your thesis paper and mention it in the procedure and data analysis. Everything we're talking about here in the coding all relates to the third subsection in the method section, the procedures and the data analysis. This is what you're going to say. You can say that you coded the data and you created codes related to your research questions. See Appendix E, and this is where all of those codes are going to be. And this is going to be in the outline form, and it'll be clear that you basically started here and you moved out. So again, the mistake a lot of students make is they start thinking first like this. They actually start thinking, okay, probably my theme will be this. And then when they start to label, they're already trying to imagine these other categories and themes. Try to avoid doing that. Go through the process. The process works. The process works because people have been doing this for a long time, and it works if you do it correctly. If you do it incorrectly, it doesn't work so well. And it really is no more complicated than this. It's starting specific and moving general, but those codes, again, can be predetermined. They can come from the theory, and or they can be emergent. You can describe and create those themes as needed. And generally speaking, I think most of you would benefit by keeping an open mind when you assign these codes, and be open to creating new codes in the process. I think that's where you're likely to find some interesting information. And this coding process is at the root of gaining an understanding of your material, of your data. If you rush through this process, if you run through it and try to do it, cut corners and try to get through it very quickly, and don't use this inductive approach where you go from the specific to the general and you rush to these themes, your results and discussion section will suffer. It will be obvious. Okay? It's very, very obvious when this coding process, when the students have not gone through this process. Now, a couple of things I'll say here. The last step in doing this, when you complete your cycles, when you complete the coding process, all right, step number 5.
Sorry, teacher.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Give me a very specific example about a code and a category and a theme, because I understand, well, code, you already said that it, for example, school
Mhm.
support and home support. So what would be an example of a category taking into account those goals?
Okay. Does anyone have any text, anything in writing that that they want to share that we can look at together as a group? I mean, I can come up with an example here, you know, on my own. But if we can come up with one that, based on some data that anyone has,
On the chat.
I'm sorry.
I sent like an example on the chat.
Okay.
An email.
Let me see here. Okay. But do you have? Can you share with me any text? I'm actually just looking for, let's say, I know you probably haven't done any transcriptions yet, but a text from, let's say, an exchange between a teacher and a student, or maybe a text from something from Google Classroom, or let's see what else, even some student work. Because, yeah, this is a good example of the theme and subcodes and, yeah, sub-themes. But I'll share with you, let me just give you an example here. And this, all right, let's see here. Let's see. Well, I'm pulling something up. If anybody has like an example of any real text that you have, this would also, you know, this will, I think, give you a clear idea. Because this example that I'm sharing here, this is just a page online, right? But you're basically looking at text. So it doesn't matter if the text is coming from a discussion or an exchange between a teacher and a student. It could be student work. It could be a student, like a lesson plan, right? Anything that's in text form, you're coding. So if I'm looking at a piece of text, and in this particular text, people with strong emotional, so let's say that I am focusing on just motivation, okay? Student motivation. So I'm looking for anything that relates to motivational learning or emotional learning. All right, so I want to look for something specific. So people in this particular text, people with strong emotional skills are better to cope with everyday challenges. Cope with everyday challenges. All right, I might code that. So copy here. And I might say, okay, cope with everyday challenges. And I'm going to label this coping with challenges. Coping with challenges. Or let's say cope with everyday challenges. Right? Here's one, benefit academically. So I would have another, this is my text. Again, this is the first cycle. So I'm going to have this. And maybe I call this academic benefits. Now notice here, I'm using the same words. I changed the order, but I'm using, this would be in vivo coding. I'm using specifically the same here. I'm using the same codes, right? I could choose other types of labels, but so far this is one way that I could be doing this. Go back. Professionally. Okay, it's another one. Copy. Notice I'm copying word for word the text, whether it's one word. In this case, it's words or phrases. And that's what I've chosen so far to analyze. And I can label this professional. Okay, or I could say being professional. And so maybe I go through this sorry about that. Maybe I go through this process. Imagine this is just one data source, but I might have 5 or 6 different data sources or more, right? Depends. I am doing the same process from a lot of different sources. And some of these might begin to repeat. Now you could say if these here that you say here, coping with challenges, academic benefits, and professional, something related to the profession, right? Imagine you have a long list here, right? These are your codes. So I would copy these codes into the next cycle. So here, I would copy these into let me go here. All right, so I have coping challenges, and I basically list all of my codes, academic benefits here. Academic benefits, and here I have professional. All right, and I'm going to have a long list of these different labels. Now, to go to the second process, right? Some of these might be, let's say, challenges would be something negative. Academic benefits might be something positive. So maybe I lump together the positives with the negatives, or maybe I have a group of labels that relate to academic benefits. Maybe I even have some examples of academic situations that are beneficial. But I'm just labeling these and grouping these into these categories, and that's where then I would create categories and put these underneath here. These coping with everyday challenges would go underneath each of these categories. All right, so I don't know if that helps. I mean, we would probably have to go through each of your, if you have a specific example, we can look at it. But the thing here is to start specific, and just, if it helps, if you want to use in vivo coding to use the same labels, you can do that. But at the end, you're going to want something like this, where you have different labels. Now, one thing I didn't mention here is you might see, like here it says subcode or subtheme. It doesn't really matter if you use words like categories or themes. You can use any type of, categorization, label. You can call it whatever you want. The main point is the process that you go through from moving from a very specific idea to label and category and group those into something more general, and then group those into something even more general. Right? And I'm seeing here, I don't know if yeah, and I think I included a link here. This is a page I think is, and I talked about this earlier. you might want to go through this and see, if this helps to go through some of this description. But do you guys see what I'm talking about here? Does this help looking at these examples?
For example, well, I think about my sentence, or what the teacher said is that she always tries to look for support from another teacher. So that's what she
Okay.
said.
Okay.
So maybe the coding would be like other teacher support. I don't know.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's
Something like
exactly
that.
right.
Or
And maybe
which is a type of coping strategy, actually.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part
So
again? You cut out a little bit.
okay. That seeking for support, for extra support, is like it's a coping strategy. Okay, so that would be like the category, and then I need to try to look at them for those categories.
Right. And this is the thing that I know. Sorry, go ahead.
Is it really necessary to like the 3-step, like the 3 divisions, the category and the theme?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would go through at least, and that was something I wanted to talk to you about, is the 3 cycles is just an example. Some go through 4 cycles, some go through 5 cycles, it depends. But I think I would try to go at least to 3 cycles. But here's the thing, just like in what you're telling me now, you're already trying to conceptualize the categories and even the themes. And what I'm suggesting that you try to do is try not to think about the categories yet. Try not to think about how you're going to group them in the 2nd cycle or the 3rd cycle. When you're in the 1st cycle, you want to be as specific as possible. And thinking about coping strategies, maybe the 1st cycle, the labeling, the initial codes are not the coping strategy, but it's even something more specific than that. Maybe it's the teacher says, okay, when I feel, let's say when I feel confused about a lesson plan on grammar, I focus, I reach out to my colleagues, my fellow teachers for support. So maybe the first category is not that I reach out to teachers, but the first code is actually issues or problems with a lesson or a grammar lesson or something. So it really get into, that's where the details help you. And when you're looking at and analyzing the interviews and the observations, really see what would be the first code that would help you later to be grouped into general other concepts. But really try to be as specific as possible and not worry about trying to analyze too much about the 2nd and 3rd cycle until they come. When you get all of those first codes from the 1st cycle, then you can look at it and say, okay, what categories are merging here? And if you do it that way, you're more likely to find maybe other interesting aspects of your analysis. Okay, again, this is an inductive approach, so it's really just looking at a very specific case and then grouping those and building out to the general. But yeah, generally speaking, that's the idea. Take those concepts and again, it's going to require looking at all of the information here that you have transcribed and looking for that level of detail.
Okay, yes,
Oh.
thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? So we finished here talking about the coding process.
Where can we find that page that you're showing right now?
I included it in the post, in the chat rather.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, guys? So far, we're almost finished here, but I want to allow some time for any questions about the coding process, moving from this process of going from cycle to cycle, going from the specific to the general. Try to go through 3 cycles. Think about the types of data, right, that you have. And remember that really the first step is to transcribe, because that you can't really do anything until you transcribe. You're not even going to be able to know in detail what codes you need until you transcribe and get everything in text form, so that you can begin that process of evaluating the text. And remember that if you're looking at audios and videos or classes, for example, it's not always necessary to have to transcribe the whole class. You need to transcribe whatever you need to that relates directly to your research questions. So a couple of final considerations. Okay, so moving from the first to the second cycle requires that the same coding system be applied to all data sources. Okay, I mentioned this earlier. So do not think that you have certain codes that only apply to the teacher's interviews, and you have different codes that only apply to student interviews. No, the same list applies to both interviews. You're using the same system and the same coding. Now, you might have different codes, perhaps, from the students, but maybe not. If you're talking about comparing perspectives between the teacher and the student, and let's say that you're trying to see if teachers feel differently in how students are motivated than the students themselves, then all the questions relate in some way about motivation, about what they like, what aspect of the class do they like, what kind of teaching technique or materials is the teacher using. Maybe the teacher will say, I like to use cartoons in class, like video cartoons, because it helps motivate students to learn grammar. And so your coding, you might have some codes about cartoons, right, or video cartoons, and you ask the same question or similar questions to the students, and they talk about cartoons because maybe they were used in class and you observed it as the researcher. The students may say, I don't like it, or I like it, whatever. You can code, you're using the same code. You would say something like, you would be able to say, cartoons, that would be a code. If the students are being more specific and they say, I like the cartoons because it allows me to practice my speaking, and the teacher says something like, well, the cartoons are helpful because they help, writing activities, for example. Well, then maybe the first code would be help writing, right? Benefits of helping the written skill. And the students responded, it helps with their speaking. So benefits of helping the speaking skill. And later you categorize those two into the cartoons. Okay, so it just depends on at what level do you start? What kind of initial codes do you begin with? Right? But the idea is that you're using all the data sources together in this one system of applying codes, right? Again, all the codes will apply to all the data sources. The second point here, the terms initial codes, categories, and themes. This is only theoretical. You don't have to use these words, okay, or think of it in these terms, but the process is what's important. You go through cycle 1, and then you group those into cycle 2, and then you group those into cycle 3. Whether you call it initial codes, categories, or themes, or you call it something else, that's fine, right? If it helps you conceptualize it in a different way. But the point here is that you're moving from the specific to the general. Now, you might have some cases, for example, with teaching techniques, we mentioned this earlier, you might have materials that lead to techniques that lead to methods. Okay, so that might be a way to conceptualize how you group text, how you label and group different text. This could be more relevant to teaching techniques maybe, or teaching behaviors. Okay, moving from materials, techniques to methods, or something else. Okay. In the example above, 3 cycles were discussed, right? And I mentioned this earlier as well. The number of cycles will depend on the research objective. It will also depend on how specific you start. Okay, but I would try to consider at least 3 cycles. I think 2 is questionable. Of course, we need at least 2, but I'm thinking at least 3. And it all depends on how specific you can start. These initial codes, the codes that you develop in the first cycle, again, try to be specific. Don't make the mistake that many students make. They tend to, once they've collected all the data, they neglect and they tend to rush through the data analysis to get, again, to the write-up that they want to start writing right away in the results and discussion. So don't make that mistake. Spend the time that's necessary, right? Spend the time that's necessary so that you get your head around the analysis. And to be able to do that, the coding process is going to help you more than anything. By doing this process, you're going to leave this process with a really good understanding of the different types of data. And just because you have data doesn't mean you should present it. Some information is going to be more important than others. This process of coding and analyzing this information is there so that you can choose what do you mention, what do you include, and what do you exclude. It's very important that you consider what should you exclude, because you want to try to focus more on the unexpected. You want to try to include things that you find interesting, that relate to your research questions. Maybe it was something that you didn't anticipate. Maybe it's something that goes even against the theory, right? So think about the coding in terms of that, and it will help you. You'll find some information here that might be interesting, and that's what you're looking for. You want to find what's interesting, and don't just include information just to include information. A lot of times this process is there to figure out what not to include. And if you have collected a lot of data, and this is why I've been encouraging everyone, just try to get as much data as possible. Try to get as many observations as you can. Try to get as many interviews as you need to completely answer your research questions, so that when you go to analyze, you have a lot to work with. And you're not going to include all of it. You're going to be choosing what to include and what to exclude. Questions, guys? Doubts, concerns?
Me.
Yes.
So we should turn in the method section for April 23rd, right?
Yes, I'm going to ask everyone to try to complete the method section by April 23rd. The only exception would be perhaps 1 or 2 sentences at the end of the 3rd section called Procedure and Data Analysis, because you're probably still going through the data analysis. So that's okay if you leave that until, let's say, we come back in May when you have completely finished the data analysis. But yes, try to finish by next Friday the participant section, the instrument section, and at least the procedure section, so that you can really focus only on now the data collection. Again, probably 1 or 2 sentences mentioning the data analysis will be enough in the methods section. Just something brief. It requires a lot of work, but when you mention it in the methods section, it's just a couple of sentences.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Also include, as a reminder, in the methods section, eventually you'll need to include also the code list. All right, so in your description of your data analysis in the methods section, you'll need to say, you know, the information, the qualitative information was coded, categorized, and then grouped by themes, if those are the words that you want to use, and then you can say C appendix. You could say a code list was used, and you could say C appendix C to include that later on in the paper. ¿Qué más? Any other questions, my friends?
Me, teacher.
Yes.
For example, I'm going to have my tutoring section on May 3rd, when I have to answer my reflect questions about the tutoring section.
Okay, so there are no reflections required during the break for the next 2 weeks. Okay, so you won't have to upload anything into Notion for reflection purposes for the next 2 weeks. When we start up in the May 3rd, then we'll continue as normal, starting May 3rd that week. So you'll either have a tutoring session that week or a reflective, or a written journal.
Okay, so I have to write my reading journal on Monday 3rd, May 3rd.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, guys? Any other questions? Any other questions, guys? About the data analysis? About anything, basically anything else related to your research?
Teacher?
Yes.
Well, I have a question related to my tutoring session because I had it today, but I don't know if I can still do it today, but after this.
Okay, sorry. Could I ask, if you guys aren't speaking, if you could mute your mic? I'm having a hard time hearing the question. Sorry. Can you mute your mic, Jessica? Please. Thank you. I'm sorry, Gonzalo, can you repeat the question?
Yes, it's because I had my tutoring session today, so I want to know if I can have it after this meeting.
Sure. Sure. When we finish, anyone who had a session scheduled today, I'll stay online here. We can either meet now, or we can reschedule it for later in the day. That's fine. But yeah, I would like to talk with everyone who had a session scheduled for today. So yeah, just stick around, Gonzalo, and we'll talk about it. All right. Any other questions, guys, about the data analysis? Any other questions? All right, I'm going to be around I'm not sure what kind of schedule I'm going to have over the next couple of weeks, but I'm going to be, doing some work and be online, and probably will be sharing some additional information. All right. So if I post anything to Microsoft Teams, if anybody has questions, of course, I will address your questions. If you want to post messages, that's fine. Again, I'm not sure what my schedule will be in terms of meeting, but we'll play it by ear. But let me know if you guys have questions, and try to enjoy your break, of course. And I want you guys to take it easy a little bit. And I hope that you guys stay safe and your families are well. And I know these are trying times, difficult times for everyone. So of course, I hope you guys take care of yourselves. And if there's some concerns about the technology and having the online sessions or the oral defenses online, let me know. Send me a letter. I'm not sure what will happen, but I will send it to the head of the department, talk about it, and try to get you a response if those of you have those concerns. But it is important that if you have those concerns, that you include your name on that letter, as I mentioned earlier in today's session. And this doesn't mean, like we mentioned, that it would be like all one or the other. I think maybe the what we're requesting would be maybe a combination. I'm not sure. Some online, some. I'm not even sure if face-to-face is a possibility, though, to be honest. But I certainly will. If you present me with a letter, I'll present it to the head of the department. All right, my friends. Any other questions? Any other comments, suggestions, concerns?
Teacher, if we do additional changes to our literature review, can we send it to you for another possible check?
Yes, you can. I'm going to ask that any further requests, I'm going to ask that you make those before or by May 3rd. Okay. I will try. I'm not sure how quick I'll be able to turn it around in certain terms of feedback. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible during break. But yes, if you want me to look at your literature review again, I'm going to ask that you try to go through and address all of the changes, okay, based on the first round of feedback. Try to go through all of those, look at APA if that was a thing, if you need to clarify and look into some of the examples. And I think the easiest way to check your references, for example, is to go to the SWAY presentation in the link that I'm providing in Notion, and go to the chapter 10 at the very end where you see examples. And in that SWAY presentation, I include maybe 10 examples of some of the more common types of references. So I think just by looking at those examples and looking at what text is italicized, spacing, punctuation, right, and including like page numbers or the DOIs, that's a big one. The DOIs, there were changes to the 7th edition. So now we have to include the URL to the DOI. So it starts HTTPS, right? And then the DOI, those kinds of things. Make sure that you're single spacing within each reference and double spacing between each reference. Single space within, double space between each reference. Make sure you're checking that. So yeah, make sure you try to go through all of those changes and then send me your revised version, and I'll take another look at it. And if anybody has questions about my feedback, okay, then make sure you're asking. Ask me if, okay, meal plan. What do you mean by meal plan? I don't know what you mean by evidence or analysis. Make sure you're asking for clarification when you need it. If the feedback that I'm providing is not clear, or you're not sure, or you just need further explanation. Either I can try to create another video to send and share with everyone if that would help, or of course we can have a discussion. Okay, but the main thing is that you're getting your answers addressed. And again, I'll repeat, I mentioned this earlier, regardless of where you are in the process. Okay, some of you I'm interacting with a lot, and that's great. I'm trying to give you some feedback. We're having good conversations. And some of you I haven't heard a lot from. Okay, so regardless of where you are in the process, make sure you're reaching out to me. We can talk about whatever situation you have here to try to help you get through this process, try to help you complete this research process. If you're watching this recording later on and you weren't even able to be in this session, make sure that you are contacting me to get whatever you need from me to help you complete the research project. Okay, so yes, please send me your requests if you want me to look again at your literature review, but I'm going to ask after May 3rd, no more revisions, or I guess no more feedback for that, because we're going to really need to focus on the rest. We're going to have 2 weeks to focus on the results and discussion section, and it's going to be a deep dive into trying to finish up and meet the final deadline, May 21st. That's a long answer to a short question. Thank you, Jessica, for the question. Any other questions, my friends? It's a shame we couldn't have this class together. It's been kind of difficult having go through this process only online. That's much better being face to face, but unfortunately we weren't able to do that. But I'm enjoying your